Hello, everyone. No Life here, and today we are finally going to go over the long-awaited Leatherface rework video that I said I was going to be doing for what feels like a year now. But before we go into details on what I'd like to change to Leatherface, I feel like we have to dive back into the past and discuss exactly what has been wrong with Leatherface from the start. So, first and foremost, we have Leatherface being required to use in order for the game to start. This was something that eventually ended up being taken out the game when Nancy and Danny were released due to players complaining about not being forced to play Leatherface, and of course, it feeding into the dodging issue, which unfortunately is still plaguing the game, as players who simply refuse to play Leatherface would just dodge the lobby when no one else would step up and fill in his rather big shoes. Now, Leatherface definitely received a lot of changes in his time, some bad, some good, so in simple fashion, we'll be going over the good, the bad, and then, of course, the ugly. The good, of course, being that in addition to Leatherface not being required, eventually they increased how fast its Leatherface would be able to go ahead and destroy a barricade. Fortunately, I do not have footage of his old animation to compare it to, but of course, I can at least show you how fast it is currently. Although I'm sure most people who watch this video would know how fast it is currently, but moving on. We then had the shadow change, I guess you call it. I can't even, or shadow buff of Leatherface not being affected by door slams as much as he used to be. Now, this I do have a comparison video of. However, before I get into that, I'll just simply go into the fact that currently, besides Taekwondo, which gives Leatherface a very long stun, I do not believe victim strength affects door slams. I don't know if it should and that's bugged or not, but if they ever did make it so, let's say Connie stunned a family member a much shorter time than any of the family members do. First and foremost, the door slam for the family should be as quick as it is for when the family slams a victim. And then, of course, it would scale upwards from there. If Leatherface is stunned by a long stun, whether it be from a high strength victim or Taekwondo, we should see his old slam animation as opposed to the way it works now, where he'd do his new door slam animation and just kind of stand there looking stupid for 8+ seconds. I'm not sure why they didn't think of doing that instead. Even with the family, I always complain about the fact I like if they simply extended the animation rather than having them just do their stun animation and then for the last 5 seconds, give or take, they just kind of again sit there. It's a little confusing to some players who don't understand what's going on, and again, it just looks stupid. But going back onto Leatherface changes, besides the barricade slams and I'm sorry, barricade breaks and door slams, I do not believe they really buffed Leatherface out of that. They promised there's some more change to make him feel more meatier coming, but just like the Sissy, Johnny, and Sunny reworks and buffs and what have you, they've yet to be seen. So at this point, it feels like just simply just don't have the manpower to commit to that stuff anymore, and instead they're putting their resources into Rush Week and the upcoming characters we'll be seeing. Sheesh, probably maybe next month or by November at this point. But going into the ugly, unfortunately, one of the things we've seen Leatherface affected by, ironically, in the Nancy and Danny release update was that his stall resistance seen a bit of a nerf. Now, the devs kept fighting us on this that it was a bug and they make this change and that change, and I'm sure I feel better. No, something went wrong, and he was definitely stalling more than he used to from overhead slam. Eventually, they confirmed this was the case, but they refused to fix it as they believe it made Leatherface more balanced from to stall more from overhead. Now, granted, if you were to find a sweet spot of where you have to rev before overheading, you do have enough stall resistance left to be able to swing after a victim and not stall. However, I still do believe there should be some measures to fixing that, but we'll get into that in just a moment here. So, now that we're all caught up on a history of Leatherface, we go into changes I like to see with him. So, Starting out, of course, we'll be going straight into his skill tree. Now, I touched up on this with my recent video on overall changes I like to see to the family, so to kind of go over it quickly. And basically, I wanted to see them at a default level 1 star resistance to Bubba by base, as well as a, the level 1 ability for Leatherface not to overheat as easily, again being base. So by adding these two things base, this then frees up some space in Leatherface's skill tree for us to give him two more unique level 3 perks as opposed to him simply having one unique level 3 perk and then the other two just being overinflated numbers of what he already can do. So for one of the level 3 perks I want to introduce, originally I played around with the idea of Leatherface being able to still attack with his saw off, but although I still think that could be an option, I'm going to put a pin in that one and instead introduce a new ability for Leatherface to have no proximity warning when he is going around with his chainsaw off. This will allow Leatherface to actually be appropriately sneaky, as he definitely did have some moments in the film where he's able to kind of pop up out of nowhere and attack the helpless victims around the house and what have you. But also, this would again make it so he's still a bit more of a threat with his chainsaw off, as now you have the possibility of him popping up out of nowhere and attacking victims. Now, the only problem with that would be without instant, it still take him a while to start up his saw. So maybe they might want to consider also doing something to make Leatherface start his saw up faster. Perhaps something on the lines of Leatherface being able to always start his saw in one pull. However, unlike with instant, he still have the animation of him raising the saw over his head. So this would still make him start his saw up overall quicker, but it would still give the victim some time to get away from him, as he'd still have that animation, which again would give him some time to run away. They also would have to make it so when his saw is off, he would make no noises. So he still have the footsteps as, but he wouldn't growl or whatever when he sees a victim, as again that could give him away if a victim is hyper alert enough. Now for the final change, I'm still gonna stick around with him being able to break through barricades and doors while he does an overhead slam. Again, this would make him use up a lot of his stall resistance bar to the point that if you were to swing immediately after breaking a door or barricade, he'd again stall unless you were to rev it enough to again put it into levels where he wouldn't again stall when he swings. So again, I believe that if we were to do these changes to Leatherface's skill tree, it'd give him a bit more life and replayability. As one of the issues I fought with Leatherface, just he feels very linear in what he does. For the most part, all you really do with Bubba is run around with his chainsaw and try to kill people, preferably while patrolling objectives, looking for victims to again do what you do best. Now, another issue I find is with Leatherface's skill tree, more particularly his right skill tree. When they went ahead and reworked the skill trees for all the characters back with Hans and Maria's release, they took Scout from his right side of his tree and put it to his middle side of the tree. Scout was kind of the whole reason why he went to the right side of the tree, and as a result, the right side of the tree just feels kind of dead. Like there's almost no reason to use it, to the point that they got rid of bringing home the bacon as opposed to actually reworking a perk, which I didn't even realize. That I looked over his skill tree again, and I kind of felt embarrassed because I talked about a whole change I want to do to it, but instead of repeating it here, I'm just going to go ahead and say if they decide to remove the perk from the game, there's no point in even beat a dead horse, so that I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, as they seem to have done themselves, as they didn't even mention they were deleting the perk. They just kind of did, but they did it for a lot of characters and want us to be surprised by it, I guess. So I was going to mention what exactly I'm going to do with the right side of the tree. However, after further review, there are some changes to perks I'll be getting into in just a moment that I believe will kind of solve the issues with this tree being rather barren. Although I guess they can maybe put Master Key and Tenderizer over here and make sure they can actually be lined up together just to make Slash and Cats happy. So We're gonna go ahead and get into perks right now. So first on the list, we'll be doing big swings. So big swings is a perk that has a negative drawback to it to go with the major positive to it, and that's the fact that you get 15% extra damage to your character. However, they use 200% more stamina upon swinging. Leatherface doesn't use stamina for his attacks. He does his stall resistance, so this does not affect him. It only gives him a positive aspect. So I'd like to change that so Leatherface would actually stall more from using big swings. This would make it a bit more risky for him to use and not just a win more perk, basically, or just free damage, really. Now, this also ties into another change I make to Leatherface. In hindsight, I probably should have mentioned before, but I think it makes more sense to mention it here, as this is where you'd kind of see a lot more of it come into play. As I want Leatherface to be unable to go into a chainsaw sprint if he is out of stamina. So, hang on before you guys start screaming at me, all the Leatherface bins. The basis behind this is just the fact that it feels really oppressive coming from a victim standpoint to just have a character that hits the hardest, has default the best stamina in the game, and again pretty much has infinite sprint during the attack that has the potential to literally one-shot victims with the right perk setup. So by making Leatherface depend on his stamina to sprint longer, this will actually give players more of a reason to invest into endurance. Let's be honest, this is just about how everybody's set up on Leatherface is going to look like, as generally there's again no reason to put into his endurance at all, as he doesn't need it. You can do it for memes or maybe to sit there and say, oh well, what if I stall? Then at least I could still sprint after him for a little bit. But if you're running scout, that's not gonna matter either. So I feel like this simple change to the way his overhead works would also help out with perks such as fire up and all the other standard perks he has, as this would give you a reason to actually put those on to allow you to sprint longer. For example, slow and steady. Slow and steady allows you to use 50% less stamina upon sprinting. However, it gives you a 15 to 10% movement speed penalty. I'd also add in the ability for family members to use less stamina from swinging, and of course, Leatherface to stall less when using it. And I believe that having the same logic apply to easily tucker it out, which would allow you to again stall less from swinging, but your stamina generation would be affected. Would again make the right skill tree actually have some uses that you'd want to go over to that side if you want to stall less. So that could be very useful, being able to fall up on victims easier and not be as punished for missing your overheads. Now, I also would have to double back to sip, sip, sip. I said that before. I'm going to say it again. That should be deleted from Leatherface's tree and replaced with Fresh is best, as you don't want any type of perk that reduces damage. As again, the whole point of Leatherface. Let me say that again. The whole point of picking Leatherface is to again do damage. So if you're doing less damage from a perk, you probably don't want to use it. So Fresh's Vest would only affect him picking up blood. You generally would want to feed your ramp after a kill, if at all, anyway. So this would make more sense. And of course, any kind of perk that can be compared to surgical, which doesn't have any kind of negative downsides, just again makes you do more damage. It only makes sense for you to pair it with surgical or just not at all. So that needs to be in the same side of surgical for Bubba. So again, I believe with all these changes, this will make his right side of tree much more appealing to use, especially because he does have Bloodlust and activated over there, so he does have some damage perks to pair with the stall resistance as well. So I believe again, this would give you more of a reason to come over to that right side of the tree. As right now, you have no reason to go over there. Activated, it's not worth it at all. So moving on to two cycle charge. Again, this could also give you a reason to run that perk, as there's not much of a reason to run that either, except again to make you stalling less punishing. Two cycle charge would allow you to effectively stall, or rather, I'm sorry, run out of stamina while overheading less just by putting that on, as a kind of recharge your stamina as it's decreasing, and again, overall just make it last longer. Now, one thing I also forgot to touch upon, and this is going to be the last bit of this before I kind of move on, is that when Leatherface runs out of stamina while he's in a overhead sprint, this wouldn't make him stall. It would just simply make him automatically lower his stall, kind of like he does when he runs through Virginia's powder. So You would still be able to attack victims normally. It's just you wouldn't be able to again hit them with an overhead, as again you have your bar lowered down to normal levels as opposed to overhead. Now, of course, as soon as you have stamina left, you'd then be able to go into an overhead spurt again. But yeah, that is basically how that's going to function. So moving on, the few other things I'd want to change to Leatherface would be his hit detection. Another thing I swore they did along with Leatherface stalling more is that it doesn't feel as wide and long as that it used to be. So in addition to me wanting to see them add a bit more length to his thrust so you can hit victims going through gaps a little easier, I'd also like to see him just have an overall wider AoE from doing an overhead slam, as this would make his overheads a bit more forgiving, as now you wouldn't have such a risk of missing due to a very squirrely victim being in front of you, or just straight up hits that are just a little questionable as to how they missed. So with these changes, these hits like on this Julie here would be a lot more common, and again would just make Leatherface a lot more approachable, especially for new players. Now, I also would like to see them fixing a lot of these hit detection issues with hitting victims down wells, in addition to them properly fixing it, of course, so that when a victim gets hit going down a well, they only are be able to hit once. This would be a bit of a fair trade for Leatherface, and well, overall the family having easier time hitting victims. Period. And we also need to fix whatever the heck these issues. So I've had this issue happen so many times, it's starting to get frustrating, as it often leads to victims getting away when you just randomly just have your hits constantly rejected or whatever. I didn't even know this game had a hit rejection system, but that should not be a thing. And they also might want to look into the issues with Leatherface, where when he swings, just as he's getting out of an overhead, he did this weird thing where he'd kind of do what is called an E-Hind attack, where he just kind of swings super fast, much like you see me doing it at Sunny there. This can lead to some kills, sure, but I prefer it just be removed from the game, as I think it just causes more problems than anything. But with that being said, I think that just about covers it. Only thing I'd really want to change after that would be the fact that Leatherface should receive a 10-second stun immunity upon spawn, or that, or we need to just go around the maps and remove any bone piles that are anywhere near Leatherface's spawn. Put some other static bone spawns around the map to make up for it. I don't care. Just I don't want to see Leatherface being able to be stabbed right out of spawn, much like how he used to be able to be barged by Leland right out of spawn. Um, This is kind of a bad clip to use, but I unfortunately deleted all the clips of me stabbing Leatherface in the back or what have you. So this is the best I could come up with. But you get the point here. If you're able to get out of spawn quick enough, there's a pile right here behind Bubba. You could grab it and stab him right in the back. Ignore the fact that Bubba, the being stabbed here, is invisible. But yeah. So with that being said, I believe that just about touches up on everything I'd want to see changed to Leatherface. There is also the thing that I want to see them just overall look into the barricades and remove a lot of these ones, such as on gas station, which is notorious for having plenty of barricades that can put the family in hostage situations where they opt out of anyone that can gap, or just Leatherface or hands, anyone that can break a barricade, period. I'm not sure why they're so obsessed with making us pick a character that could break a barricade, but I'm okay at barricades helping victims in chase and whatnot. I just don't believe they should completely block off an area and make it impossible to get to them, or just so inconvenient to get to them that the victim can easily get away from you. But again, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope most of you will come back to watch my next video, which will be going over changes I'd like to see done to Nancy. I fought so hard to not do a video on Nancy's. I kept huffing to Copen and saying she's fine, but the longer she's been in the game without changes, the more I've played her, I've definitely started to see that Nancy's showing her age here. So it'd be nice to see some change to her, and I have plenty of ideas how to do that. So as always, this has been No Life, and if you haven't already, get a life.
Coop, hit me. I got adrenaline. You know it. Hit me now. I'll kill you. I'm mad Cook for slamming his homeboy with the door.